Radiation poisoning. It's one of the deadliest threats in a doomsday scenario. Whether from a nuclear explosion, a reactor meltdown, or a dirty bomb, exposure to radiation can be fatal if you don't know how to protect yourself. But how long could you actually survive? And more importantly, what can you do to increase your chances? That's exactly what we're going to break down today. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to Doomsday Prepper. We cover survival strategies, prepping techniques, and everything you need to stay alive when disaster strikes. Now let's get into it. 1. Understanding radiation poisoning, what it is and how it kills. Radiation poisoning, or acute radiation syndrome, ARS, happens when the body is exposed to high doses of ionizing radiation. Unlike chemical poisoning, where a single exposure might be survivable, radiation exposure accumulates in the body, causing progressively worse damage. The effects depend on dose, duration, and shielding. In other words, how much you're exposed to, for how long, and how well you're protected. Radiation primarily damages cells that reproduce rapidly, like those in your bone marrow, digestive system, and skin. That's why some of the earliest symptoms of exposure include nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, and burns. But the real danger comes later. Radiation destroys your body's ability to produce white blood cells, making infections deadly. And it breaks down internal organs, leading to fatal internal bleeding. Radiation comes in 3 main types. Alpha particles, the weakest type, easily blocked by skin or clothing. Beta particles, stronger, capable of penetrating skin and causing burns. Gamma rays, the deadliest, capable of passing through solid materials, damaging cells at a deep level. If you're exposed to radiation, time is your enemy. The faster you recognize the threat and take action, the better your chances of survival. 2. How long can you survive radiation exposure? Your survival depends on the dose of radiation you receive. Radiation is measured in rads or sieverts, and the effects vary dramatically based on the exposure level. Here's a general breakdown. Mild exposure, under 100 rad. You may feel nauseous, fatigued, or have a slight headache. The body can recover from this level over time. Moderate exposure, 100-300 rad. Symptoms become more severe, including vomiting, weakness, and a compromised immune system. Death is possible without medical treatment. Severe exposure, 300 to 600 rad. This level damages the bone marrow and digestive system, causing internal bleeding, infections, and extreme fatigue. Even with treatment, survival isn't guaranteed. Lethal exposure, 600 plus rad. At this point, the body begins shutting down completely. Death typically occurs within days or weeks. The key to survival isn't just how much radiation you're exposed to, but also how quickly you react. Getting to safety within the first few minutes of exposure can mean the difference between life and death. 3. Immediate actions after exposure. If you're caught in a nuclear explosion, near a reactor leak, or in any area contaminated by radiation, your first steps will determine whether you live or die. Here's what you need to do immediately. 1. Get indoors fast. If you're outside when an explosion or radiation event occurs, find shelter as quickly as possible. Radiation levels are highest in the first few hours, so staying exposed can be deadly. 2. Seal off contaminated air. Close all windows, doors, and ventilation systems. If possible, move to a basement or an inner room with thick walls. 3. Remove contaminated clothing. Radiation particles can stick to fabric. Carefully take off your clothes and store them in a sealed plastic bag away from your living space. 4. Wash thoroughly. Use warm water and soap to remove radioactive dust from your skin and hair. Avoid scrubbing too hard, as broken skin absorbs radiation faster. 5. Monitor symptoms. If nausea, vomiting, or burns appear within hours, your exposure level was severe. Seek medical attention if possible. The first 48 hours are critical. Taking these actions immediately can drastically improve your survival odds. 4. Finding shelter. Your first line of defense. When dealing with radiation, shelter is your #1 defense. The more barriers between you and the outside world, the better. The 3 main factors for effective radiation protection are time. The longer you stay indoors, the lower your risk. The worst radiation levels occur within the first 48 hours, so avoid going outside during this period. Distance. The farther you are from the radiation source, the better. If you can evacuate safely, move perpendicular to the wind direction to escape fallout faster. Shielding. Radiation is stopped by thick and dense materials. Concrete, brick, packed earth, and lead are some of the best barriers. If you don't have access to a fallout shelter, the next best option is a basement or an interior room with no windows. Stack books, furniture, and even bags of soil around the walls for extra shielding. Staying inside for at least 2 weeks significantly lowers your risk. After that, radiation levels will drop, but caution is still necessary. 5. Food and water. Safety in a nuclear event. Radiation doesn't just affect people. It contaminates food and water sources. If you eat or drink something that's been exposed to radiation, you can suffer internal exposure, which is far more dangerous than external exposure. To stay safe, only consume sealed food. Canned goods, bottled water, and vacuum-sealed products are your best options. Avoid fresh produce. Unless it was grown indoors, fruits and vegetables exposed to fallout may be unsafe. Purify your water carefully. Boiling water does not remove radiation. Instead, use distillation or high-grade radiation water filters. Having a well-stocked emergency food and water supply is critical in a nuclear event. Plan ahead and store at least a month's worth of supplies in a radiation-proof area. 6. Decontamination, removing radioactive particles. If you think you've been exposed to radioactive fallout, decontaminating yourself is critical. Here's how to do it right. 1. Get rid of contaminated clothing. Take off all clothing and seal it in plastic bags. This alone removes up to 90% of radioactive dust. 2. Wash with warm water. Use soap to gently remove fallout particles. Pay extra attention to hair, hands, and exposed skin. 3. Use clean water sources. If tap water is unsafe, use bottled water or collect rainwater from uncontaminated areas. Radioactive particles can also be inhaled, so wearing a mask, preferably an N95 or better, is highly recommended if you must go outside. 7. Medical treatment for radiation poisoning. If you've been exposed to high levels of radiation, immediate medical treatment is your best chance of survival. While there is no complete cure for radiation poisoning, proper care can help the body fight the damage and improve your odds. Key treatments for radiation exposure. 1. Potassium iodide, Ki. Pills. These protect your thyroid from absorbing radioactive iodine, which can cause long-term damage or cancer. Ki pills work best if taken before or within 24 hours of exposure. However, they only protect the thyroid, not the rest of the body. 2. Prussian blue. This medication binds to radioactive cesium and thallium, helping the body pass them out through waste. It reduces internal radiation exposure, but only works for specific radioactive materials. 3. Filgrastim, Noipagine. This drug stimulates white blood cell production, which is critical since radiation damages bone marrow. Without it, even minor infections can become deadly. 4. Phosphor fluids and electrolytes. Severe radiation poisoning can cause dehydration and electrolyte imbalances, leading to organ failure. Hydration is essential for survival. 5. Antibiotics and antivirals. Since radiation weakens the immune system, infections become a major threat. A well-stocked medical kit with broad-spectrum antibiotics can help prevent complications. What to expect? If exposed to a lethal dose, mild to moderate exposure, 100 to 300 rad. You may recover with medical treatment, but expect weeks of sickness. Severe exposure, 300-600 rad. Even with treatment, survival is uncertain. Death often occurs within weeks due to internal bleeding and infections. Lethal exposure, 600+ rad. Most people will not survive beyond 1 to 2 weeks. At this point, medical intervention can only provide comfort. In a post-disaster world, professional medical care may not be available, making prevention and early intervention your best chance at survival. 8. Long-term effects of radiation exposure. Even if you survive the initial radiation exposure, the battle isn't over. The long-term effects can be devastating and may not appear for months or even years. Cancer risks and genetic damage. One of the biggest concerns with radiation exposure is the increased risk of cancer, particularly thyroid cancer, common if exposed to radioactive iodine. Leukemia, due to bone marrow damage. Lung cancer, if inhaling radioactive dust. Radiation also causes genetic mutations, which can lead to birth defects in future generations. This is why pregnant women and children are at the highest risk. Chronic illness and organ damage. Radiation weakens the body over time, leading to chronic fatigue and weakness, due to damage to blood cells in the immune system. Digestive problems. Permanent damage to the stomach lining can cause ongoing nausea, vomiting, and malnutrition. Neurological issues. High radiation doses can cause memory loss, confusion, and even long-term cognitive impairment. Can you detox from radiation? There's no way to completely remove radiation from the body, but you can limit damage by eating a high antioxidant diet. Foods rich in vitamin C, E, and selenium can help repair cells. Drinking plenty of clean water, staying hydrated helps flush radioactive particles. Avoiding further exposure. Any additional radiation increases the damage already done. Long-term survival depends on reducing continued exposure and monitoring for late developing symptoms. 9. Preparing for a radiation event before it happens. The best way to survive radiation poisoning? Be prepared before it happens. If you wait until disaster strikes, it may be too late. Build a radiation survival kit. Every prepper should have a radiation-specific survival kit that includes potassium iodide, Ki pills, enough for everyone in your household, N95 or 100 masks to prevent inhalation of radioactive dust, Geiger counter or dosimeter to measure radiation levels and determine safe areas, thick plastic sheeting and duct tape to seal off windows and doors from fallout, long-term food and water supply, at least 1 month's worth of sealed, non-perishable food and bottled water, protective clothing, gloves, goggles, and full-body suits to minimize exposure, nowhere to shelter. Your home should have a designated fallout shelter, ideally. Underground, a basement or bunker provides the best protection. Interior room. If you don't have a basement, choose a room with no windows. Thick barriers. The more dense material between you and the outside world, the better. Practice emergency drills. Just like fire drills, radiation drills should be part of your prepping routine. Make sure every family member knows where to go in case of nuclear fallout, how to seal off rooms to prevent contamination, how to use a Geiger counter to detect radiation. Preparation is what separates survivors from victims. The more you plan ahead, the higher your chances of making it through. 10. Final thoughts. The key to survival is preparation. Radiation poisoning is one of the deadliest threats in a doomsday scenario, but it's not an instant death sentence. Those who react quickly and prepare properly have a real chance of survival. The 3 most important takeaways. 1. Time is critical. The faster you get indoors and decontaminate, the better your odds. 2. Shielding is key. Thick walls, basements, and underground shelters are your best protection. 3. Long-term planning saves lives. Stockpile supplies, learn how to measure radiation levels, and prepare your home in advance. Why preppers will survive. In a nuclear disaster, the unprepared will panic, make fatal mistakes, and expose themselves to deadly radiation. But preppers already have a plan. You'll have shelter, supplies, and knowledge, which means you'll stand a much better chance of outlasting the crisis. Make no mistake, this is a survival scenario you can win. If you found this guide helpful, subscribe to Doomsday Prepper for more survival tactics, prepping tips, and strategies that could one day save your life. Stay ready, stay safe, and keep prepping.